have the time and take a stroll in your mind. In August of '64, a Tonkin Gulf incident ignites a war. Admiral Morrison gets attacked, then America strikes back. Weird scenes inside the canyon. Weird scenes inside the canyon. Military kids depart the hill, and into the canyon they will fill. They protest people who kill, but are they any different still? Weird scenes inside the canyon. Weird scenes inside the canyon.
Welcome to my summary of David McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. This is Part 9, Chapter 11, Detours, Rustic Canyon and Greystone Park. Since this series is based on a book, it's best to start at Chapter 1. I'll leave a link to Chapter 1 in a pinned comment. Thanks for watching and please share. Chapter 11, Detours, Rustic Canyon and Greystone Park.
By the time Manson shifted base from Rustic Canyon to an old ranch in Chatsworth, he'd begun formulating the notion that he and his followers had to prepare themselves for a race war with Black America.
Barney Hoskins, writing in Hotel California. We must now temporarily relocate to Rustic Canyon, which lies about 9 miles west of Laurel Canyon in the Hollywood Hills. Beach boy Dennis Wilson lived in Lower Rustic Canyon in the late 1960s. Dennis lived in a palatial log cabin-style house at 14400 Sunset Boulevard that had once belonged to humorist Will Rogers. The expansive home sat on 3 lushy landscaped acres. In the summer of 1968, Charlie Manson and various members of his entourage moved in with Wilson. It seems that Charles Tex Watson was already living there for reasons that have never really been explained. As many as 24 members of Manson's clan spent the entire summer there, with Wilson picking up the tab for all expenses. The Mansonites regularly drove Wilson's expensive cars and demolished one of them. Dennis didn't seem to mind. He was busy recording Manson and Brother Brian's home studio and inviting fellow musicians like Neil Young over to his house to hear Charlie perform. Young was so impressed that he urged Mo Austin to sign him. Dennis would later claim that he destroyed all the Manson demo tapes and that he remembered almost nothing of his time with Charlie and the family. At some point, Dennis had a change of heart and decided that maybe he did know a little something about the murders. "I know why Charles Manson did what he did," said Dennis. "Someday I'll tell the world and I'll write a book and explain why he did it." That book was never written, and if that story was never told. Instead, Dennis Wilson drowned under questionable circumstances on December 28, 1983, in the marina where his beloved yacht had previously been docked. But this story isn't really about Dennis Wilson. It's about Charlie Manson and his alleged motive for allegedly ordering the Tate LaBianca murderers. According to the helter-skelter scenario popularized by lead prosecutor Vincent Bugolowski, Manson was hoping to spark an apocalyptic race war. It is said that Charlie believed that America's black population would prevail over whitey, but that having won the war, the victors would be incapable of governing themselves. And that was when Charlie would emerge from the shadows and take command. According to Barney Hoskins, Manson began formulating his race war theory during his stay in Rustic Canyon. If true, then Charlie appears to have been following the footsteps of a long-forgotten former Rustic Canyon guru, one who preceded him by a few decades, and who, like Manson, had a certain fondness for swastikas. Just to the north of Dennis Wilson's former home is a vast wilderness of undeveloped canyon lands. Lower Rustic Canyon soon gives way to Upper Rustic Canyon, and all signs of human civilization abruptly vanish. The area is undeveloped save for an old, unpaved fire road that winds along the summit between Rustic Canyon and a neighboring canyon. Aside from an occasional hiker wandering in from nearby Will Rogers State Park, there is nary a human to be seen. It is surprisingly easy to forget that one is still within the confines of the city of Los Angeles. The canyon looks nothing like Los Angeles. It is beautiful, serene, pastoral, and yet, filled with mist and heavily overgrown, it is also vaguely ominous. If one knows where to look, there is a narrow concrete stairway that is accessible from the fire road. That stairway descends down to the floor of the canyon, and it is a very, very long descent. 512 steps long, to be exact. This stairway seems wildly out of place, and one finds oneself pondering how many man-hours it took to set forms for 512 poured concrete steps, and how many truckloads of concrete were poured out of there in the middle of nowhere. Reaching the canyon floor, the native flora has struggled mightily to reclaim the land. Remnants of a past civilization can be seen everywhere. Some structures remain largely intact. A nearly 400,000-gallon spring-fed reservoir servicing a sophisticated potable water system. Concrete-walled structure that once housed twin electrical generators capable of lighting a small town. More concrete steps, countless retaining walls, professionally graded and paved roads, weathered livestock stables, and at the former entrance, an imposing set of electronically controlled wrought iron security gates. It seems like the kind of place tailor-made for Charlie and his family, remote and secluded. And it was located just a short hike up the canyon from the place that Charlie Manson called home in the summer of 1968. While exploring this place, the obvious questions begin to come to mind. Who developed this remote portion of the canyon in what feels like the middle of nowhere? The goal appears to have been to create a hidden and completely self-sustaining community, and an extraordinary amount of money was invested in infrastructure development. But why? Very few Angelenos know of the curious ruins in Rustic Canyon, and still fewer know the history of those ruins. Every now and then, though, a local reporter will pay a visit to the story. In May of 1992, Mark Norman of the Los Angeles Business Journal was one such reporter. According to Norman,
county records show Jessie Murphy, a widow, purchasing 50-plus acres north of Will Rogers' property in 1933, but the owners were actually named Stevens and Norman, an engineer with silver mining interest, and Winona, the daughter of an industrialist and a woman given to things supernatural. Local lore has it that Winona fell under the spell of a certain unnamed gentleman.
This trio, along with unnamed others, began a 10-year construction program costing $4 million. Starting with a water tank holding 375,000 gallons and a concrete diesel-powered generator station with foot-thick walls, both of which are still visible. The one thing the Murphy-Stevens couldn't seem to get right was the main house. They hired several architects, but in 1941, Paul Williams drafted blueprints for a sprawling mansion with 22 bedrooms, a children's dining room, a gymnasium, pool, and a workshop in the basement. 13 years later, in September of 2005, Cecilia Rasmussen of the Los Angeles Times added a few details to the story.
Southern California has been the cradle to many odd cults, credos, utopias, and dystopias. Among the most mysterious are the ruins of a rustic canyon enclave, once known as Murphy Ranch. On Rustic Canyon's secluded and woodsy floor stand the eerily burned-out and graffiti-scarred remains of concrete and steel structures, underground tunnels and stairways leading from the top of the canyon to the bottom. Behind the locked and rusted wrought iron entrance gates and flagstone wall stand the traces of a small community that had the capacity to grow its own food, generate its own electricity, and dam its own water. The hillsides were terraced with 3,000 nut, citrus, fruit, and olive trees, and fitted with water pipes, sprinklers, and an elaborate greenhouse. A high barbed wire fence discouraged intruders. Research indicates that it could have been home to up to 40 local Nazis from about 1933 to 1945. Armed guards patrolled the canyon dressed in the uniform worn by Silver Shirts, a paramilitary group modeled after Hitler's brown shirts. A man known through oral histories only as Herr Schmidt supposedly ruled the place and claimed to possess metaphysical powers.
Herr Schmidt, needless to say, was the gentleman whose spell Winona Stevens fell under. According to Mark Norman, Schmidt
Convinced her that the coming World War would be won by Germany, that the United States would collapse into years of violent anarchy, and that the chosen few,
read the Stevensons, the Certain Gentlemen, and other true believers,
would need a tight spot in which to hole up, self-sufficient, until the firestorm had passed. Then they could emerge not only intact, but thanks to the superiority of their politics, rulers of the anthill and, not incidentally, the origin of its new population.
Sound familiar? Murphy Ranch also reportedly featured a 20,000-gallon diesel fuel tank, livestock stables, and dairy and butchering facilities. During Murphy's Ranch's years of operation, nearby residents reportedly complained of late-night military exercises and the sounds of live gunfire echoing through the canyons. To summarize then, it appears that the city of Los Angeles was home to a very secret, militarized Nazi compound that was in operation both before and during World War II. The purpose of the decaying compound was to ride out an apocalyptic war so that the chosen few could emerge as the rulers of the New World. It was also very Manson-esque, and ironically enough, Manson and his crew spent an entire summer camped out at a home that was within a 2-mile hike of the curious place. In the late 1940s, after the close of the war, Murphy Ranch was reportedly converted into an artist colony. Architect Wilton Beckett, who designed several of the structures at the ranch, would go on to design 2 of LA's landmark structures, the Capitol Records Building and the Music Center. In 1973, the property once known as Murphy Ranch was purchased by the city of Los Angeles. As far as is known, the city has no plans to reopen the facility.
Van Cortlandt and Untermeyer functioned as outdoor meeting sites for the cult.
Murray Terry, writing in The Ultimate Evil in reference to the cult behind the Son of Sam murders. Nestled between the mouths of Laurel and Coldwater Canyons lies a large estate known as Greystone Park, home of the long-vacant Greystone Mansion. The home and the grounds it sits on is said to be, to this day, the most expensive private residence ever built in the city of Los Angeles. Constructed in the 1920s, the home and grounds carried the then unfathomable price of $4 million. In comparison, the Lookout Inn, built a decade and a half earlier, was projected to cost from $86,000 to $100,000, and it was constructed on a remote mountaintop. The massive 46,000 square foot edifice sits amid 22 lavish landscape acres of prime Hollywood Hills real estate. The home was built by uber-wealthy oil tycoon Edward L. Doheny as a wedding present for his son Edward Ned Doheny Jr. Upon the home's completion in September of 1928, young Ned Doheny and his new bride moved into the humble abode. Within months, the home would be blood-stained, and soon after it would be permanently abandoned. Poor Ned, you see, was found dead in the cavernous home on February 16, 1929. Near him lay the lifeless body of his assistant personal secretary, Hugh Pluckett. Both men had been shot. There was an inordinately long delay reporting the deaths, and an admission that the bodies had been moved prior to the arrival of the police. With family doctor and numerous relatives who arrived before the LAPD, no formal inquest was ever conducted, and the case was written off in less than 48 hours of murder, and that thing people do themselves that starts with an S, arising from a gay lover's quarrel. Despite an unlikely lack of fingerprints on the gun, Pluckett was said to be the trigger man, and the media quickly went into a frenzy playing up the scandalous homosexual angle, portraying the young Pluckett as positively demented. It is anyone's guess whether or not the two really were gay lovers, but it matters little. The rest of the story was almost certainly a work of fiction. In reality, both men were likely murdered as part of a massive cover-up damage control operation that followed the disclosure of the Harding-era Teapot Dome scandal, which the Doheny family, as it turns out, was very deeply immersed in. Both Ned and Pluckett had been scheduled to testify before the Senate Investigating Committee, as was Doheny's father, one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time. Due to the manufactured public sympathy for the grieving father, however, the congressional investigation was shelved. Some 40 years after those gunshots rang out in the opulent Greystone Mansion, a new Ned Doheny, scion of the very same Doheny oil clan, joined the ranks of the Laurel Canyon Singer-Songwriters Club. Like fellow Canyonites Terry Melcher and Graham Parsons, Doheny was viewed by many as a pampered trust fund kid. His closest circle of friends included country rockers Jackson Browne, J.D. Souther, and Glenn Frey. In addition to recording his own solo album, his self-titled debut was released in 1973, Doheny contributed to albums by such Laurel Canyon superstars as Frey, Brown, Don Henley, Linda Ronstadt, and Graham Nash. Strangely enough, New York City once had a large estate known as Greystone as well. That Greystone was donated to the city as parkland, and it thereafter became known as Untermeyer Park. The same Untermeyer Park identified by Murray Terry as one of the 2 principal ritual sites used by the Process faction behind the Son of Sam murders. The other site used by the cult was the Van Cortlandt Park, named for Jacob Van Cortlandt, the former mayor of New York, and one of David Van Cortlandt Crosby's forefathers. Another of Crosby's forefathers lent his name to Schuler Road, which happens to run along the western boundary of the Greystone estate in Hollywood Hills. I have no idea what, if anything, any of that means, but I thought it best to toss it into the mix. And with that, we conclude Chapter 11, Detours, Rustic Canyon and Greystone Park. Thanks for listening to my summary of David McGowan's
Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon.
I lived in Southern California for over 12 years, and I never ever heard about Southern California Nazis. You don't know what you don't know. If you made it this far, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Definitely share, it really helps the channel out, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Military kids depart the hill, and into the canyon they will fill. They protest people who kill, but are they any different still? Weird scenes inside the canyon. Weird scenes inside the canyon.